Ranking Member. Thank you, Secretary Rubio. Look forward to 2 sessions together today. This afternoon, you'll be in front of the Appropriations Subcommittee. And I think there's going to be some themes across both of these. First, I think we all agree that China poses our single greatest geopolitical threat and that we have no choice but to deter China across the board and to outcompete China. Senator Ricketts and I just traveled to the Philippines and Taiwan and saw directly the challenges that we face there and regionally. And you've recently had some significant successes, the DRC, Rwanda, peace transition, the avoidance of escalation in India and Pakistan, the opening towards Syria. But I also frankly think that there's been a real lack of coordination and some serious harm to our standing in the world with some of the countries that we have worked most closely with over decades. The DOGE-driven, abrupt, and largely illegal cancellation of billions of dollars of contracts for humanitarian relief and aid, and the disrespect and the dismissal of thousands of AID staff and our NGO partners stands in sharp contrast to the state reorganization process you just presented on in your following. You've submitted plans and proposals. We're having a conversation. You're going to send a congressional notification. We're going to have a hearing. That's the way that the reforming of USAID could have and should have happened. And so I just at the outset had to say, as someone who spent 15 years traveling the world, visiting both our partners and allies, looking at independent or semi-independent agencies like the MCC and the DFC and their role, and visiting NGO partners and the USAID, I reject the broad characterization of them by Elon Musk and DOGE as criminals who were wasting taxpayer money. You've heard across all of us support for PEPFAR, concern about humanitarian relief, and the vision that this is a key strategic asset for us. It's my hope that we'll work together to actually make real a more effective, focused, and sustainable foreign aid component to what STAID does, and sustaining organizations that we help build together, like the MCC, the DFC, and the Global Fragility Act. So let me turn to this for a moment. My colleague, Senator Shaheen, made reference to places in the world where the CCP and the PRC have stepped forward. I agree, they're never going to deliver humanitarian aid the way we used to, and with the breadth, depth, and effectiveness that we have. But I also think they're taking advantage of the opening to say that we're not reliable, that our decades-long partnerships can't be sustained and extended, and to question our motivations. So I think we need to step out quickly to avoid creating a big hole in our credibility globally. Let me just start on a few questions with Ukraine. The previous administration worked closely with our partners and allies in Europe on sanctions to tighten them, to close loopholes, to extend designations. Are you continuing to do that?
Work with our allies?
To tighten the sanctions?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, the Europeans have their own set of sanctions, and we've coordinated with them very closely. In fact, the president had a call with at least 6 leaders from Europe yesterday. I had meetings with what we call the Quint that include Italy, France, the UK, the Germans, the French. So we are in constant contact with them on the work that they're doing. And they're proceeding along their own route. And in fact, in our conversations in the past with the Russians, we made clear to them that the Europeans and ultimately will have to be at the table because they have their own set of sanctions that they're imposing. So the answer to your question is we have worked very closely with them. The president understands fully the options he has available to him, some of which are represented in the bill before the Senate.
In the bill before the Senate that Senator Graham and others have led and that I co-sponsor, I think we have an opportunity to put more pressure on Russia and to push Putin to get to the table and to agree to a just and enduring peace. Do you support that sanctions bill? And do you think we should continue to arm Ukraine and to strengthen the sanctions against Ukraine in order to create the conditions for a real negotiation?
Yeah, look, it may come to that point. If, in fact, it is clear that the Russians are not interested in a peace deal and they just want to keep fighting a war, it may very well come to that point. The president has made that in the past. Our belief, the president's belief, is he believes that right now if you start threatening sanctions, the Russians will stop talking. And there's value in us being able to talk to them and drive them to get to the table. Like, we'll see. Look, they have to do this. No one's claiming that this is a guarantee.
President Zelensky reversed himself, showed up, was ready and willing to negotiate, And Putin, I think, my view, continues to play for time.
Well, so
I hope that we can work together to put more pressure on Putin to get to the table and to resolve this. The other thing that I see clearly, and I think many of my colleagues do, is that what happens in Ukraine sets the table for what happens in the Indo-Pacific. That there's an increasing coordination between the Russians, the Iranians, the DPRK, and the PRC. Do you see that as well, Mr. Secretary?
Well, we remind our European allies every day that were it not for China, Russia would not be able to sustain this. And they're fully aware of that. And obviously, we all understand the presence of the North Koreans and the Iranian role in this as well. But by the same token, I would say there's a flip side to that, and that is every minute we spend, every dollar we spend on this conflict in Europe is distracting both our focus and our resources away from a potential for a much more serious, a much more cataclysmic confrontation in the Indo-Pacific. So the answer is yes, they are related, but they're related both ways. They're related on the one hand by the precedent that it could set, but they're also related by the fact that every minute that we spend on this conflict that cannot be won by military means, every resource that's expended into it is money and time that's not being spent on preventing a much more serious confrontation from a global perspective in the Indo-Pacific.
You made the point earlier that, in your view, we did not coordinate well enough between countries where we for decades had done humanitarian aid, disaster relief, public health work, and countries that ally with China in terms of resource mining and processing. One of the countries we visited was the Philippines. The Philippines is the most disaster-prone country on Earth. They have more typhoons, volcanoes, earthquakes than anywhere else, and they are a treaty ally of the United States. Yet we abruptly canceled a whole series of programs that provided disaster assistance, development assistance, and humanitarian aid. My hope is that we will work together to follow an appropriate and legal process to reform foreign aid and to align it with our values and priorities. I've long seen the MCC and the DFC as critical components in pushing back on what you correctly perceive as the PRC's extractive engagement with much of their region. What do you see as the future for organizations like the MCC and the DFC? And when we next speak this afternoon, I'll be pressing you on the America First Opportunity Fund and understanding how this nearly $3 billion Agile fund will fit into the picture for the future of aid.
Yeah, on DFC, we don't control those two entities. They're independent. They're both undergoing a review. DFC, I think, has the opportunity to potentially even expand. That's not a commitment, but I'm telling you there's talk about that. On Millennium Challenge, I think that I saw some reporting out there that it was being imploded. My understanding is the way it's being approached is that it's being reformed but not done away with. It was actually created as an alternative to the way we did aid with USAID. And so there's work happening on both of them. So my personal view on DFC is I think DFC has an opportunity to perhaps do more, and it's the sort of investment we want to make around the world and the way it's structured. And on Millennium Challenge, it's undergoing a review right now, but the review is designed to improve it, not to eliminate it.
Well, we should talk more directly about that. I'm concerned that what's happened in other agencies is happening there. The overwhelming majority of the headquarters staff being suspended or fired, and then compacts eliminated more quickly than it's being reformed. Same thing with global communications through USAGM, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia. I'm concerned that we are conceding spaces to the PRC when we should be working together on a shared objective,